From my first marriage, my merciless spouse attacked my 7-year-old son rather violently. Fear washed across his eyes when I found him, and he said nothing. Seeking solutions, I surreptitiously turned on a concealed camera. What I saw astounded me. Tape recordings caught my husband's startling behavior. I phoned the police, but just as they were about to show up, an unanticipated incident happened that left everyone gasping in shock. I'm Leah, and I'm 37 years old. With my 7-year-old son, Ethan, I call the energetic metropolis of Denver home. My life has whirled around obligations and pleasures. But let me go back to how it all started. The instant I felt I had discovered the ideal mate. I went to a local business conference emphasizing green projects 2 years ago. This was an opportunity to network, pick fresh approaches for my position as a marketing manager, and meet like-minded people, so thrill me. I had little idea this seminar would permanently alter my life. I ran across Brian at the conference. Tall with dark hair and a lovely smile that brightened the room, he was a successful city attorney. Though he was 47, 10 years my senior, age seemed to have no bearing on our initial conversation. Our discussion went naturally. He was clever and exuded a friendliness that drew people in. Speaking to someone who not only was clear but also sincerely interested in what I had to say seemed so rejuvenating. We stayed in touch following the conference, and soon we were courting. Everything felt right. I felt I had at last found someone who really got me. With Ethan, who liked him right away, Brian was fantastic. They used to play games, and I liked seeing them get close. It resembled a family, a real family. We chose to get married 1 year ago. Brian moved into my comfortable suburban house, and for a while things appeared ideal. Around the house, he was helpful. He usually picked Ethan from school when I got caught up at work. He would taunt, flashing that lovely smile. You know, I'm getting good at this parenting thing. Grateful for the help, I laughed. But with time, I began to see changes in Brian as well as in Ethan. Once a bright and energetic lad, he started to withdraw. He was no laughing child, I knew. Rather, he avoided eye contact and withdrew into his own small universe, quiet and remote. When I tried to chat to him about whether anything was bothering him at school or among his friends, he would shrug and say, "I'm just tired, Mom." Those terms never really suited me as a mother. Something seemed strange to me. When I noticed a big bruise on Ethan's arm one afternoon, it grew increasingly worrisome. "What happened here, buddy?" With a beating heart, I asked. He dismissed it, stating it came from a playground fall. But my mother's intuition cried out that something wasn't quite right. The bruising seemed to me as only the top of the iceberg. I tried to lighten the atmosphere by brushing his hair back as I put him into bed that evening. "Hey, space cadet, making plans for a lunar visit." Joking, I tried to get a smile. He merely said, "No, Ma," without even flitting a smile. His room's quiet felt weighty, like though a weight were crushing down on my chest. I left kissing his forehead, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, ideas whirling through my head. I continued thinking about the bruising, about his remoteness, and about how Brian was acting differently also. Often caught in contemplation, he had been returning home later from work, his manner changing from kind and caring to stiff and irritated. I needed to learn what was happening. Following a restless evening, I resolved to act. I yearned for the truth. I recalled learning about concealed cameras and how they might offer proof in such circumstances. That concept stuck in my head, and I started to create a schedule. I bought a little covert camera the following day and carefully placed it in Ethan's room so it would be securely disguised yet positioned to record everything. Though I hoped it wouldn't come to this, I started to get afraid thinking of Ethan being harmed. If something's going on, I'll find out, I promised myself, resolve building within me. A few days later, I went over the footage. As I browsed through the videos, praying for a glimpse of normalcy, my heart surged. But my worst concerns were realized. Brian lost his cool there and started screaming at Ethan. As he hit my small son, the sound resonated in the room's silence, and I watched in fear. Not the man I had wed here. This was an alien. The earth under me collapsed as the reality of the circumstances struck in. In what ways might he accomplish this? Eden had once made laughter abound in our house, and my heart hurt for him. Though I knew I had to compile more proof first, I wanted to face Brian right then and there. I needed to be clever about this. I couldn't act impulsively. I got in touch with Jenna, Brian's 21-year-old daughter, the following day. I wanted her to offer analysis of her father's actions. We met at a neighborhood cafe, and as I sat across from her, I experienced both optimism and fear. My voice shaking, "Jenna, I need to talk to you about your dad," I said. She stared at me, worry clearly on her face. "What about him?" I hesitated, not sure how to put my words. "I believe something is incorrect. Ethan is behaving differently, and I'm frightened." Jenna turned in her seat, her eyes lowered. "My rapport with him hasn't been great. You know, he wasn't always the best dad." Her comments made my spine shingle. "What does he mean?" I persisted. She inhaled deeply, and as she spoke, the truth showed up. Jenna had been mistreated by Brian in her younger years. She had tried to suppress this deep inside. It was the reason she had cut off contact with him over the years. My heart dropped even more when I learned this man I had with had a violent past. I realized that I couldn't manage this on my own. I have to have a strategy. Would Jenna be willing to assist me? I asked, speaking with haste. Determined, she said, "I'll do whatever it takes to stop him." Knowing that the path ahead would be difficult and uncertain, we started to plot to compile more proof against Brian. I had no idea, though, that this was only the start of a trip I never would have chosen to travel, and that would try my mother's fortitude. Following my startling talk with Jenna, I experienced a mixture of anxiety and will. Having discovered a secret about Brian, I felt I had to move quickly. Should he have harmed Jenna, it was impossible to know how far he could go with Ethan. I had to be careful even though I needed to compile additional proof to defend my son. I wanted nothing more than to avoid tipping Brian off and endangering Ethan more broadly. Jenna and I decided she would schedule Brian a meeting. She seemed to get under his skin, and I hoped she would set off enough agitation to cause a confession. Though I knew it was essential, the idea of her facing him made my gut turn over. We agreed to get together once again at the cafe to polish our idea. "Are you definitely ready to do this?" As we sat at our regular table, the afternoon sun was warmly glowing Jenna. Jenna nodded with a sobering look. "I have to get right on. It is time I faced him. Nobody ought to have to go through what we went through." Though I respected her bravery, the worry for Ethan's safety tore at me. "Just use caution. We have to ensure your safety," I advised. "I will." She reassured me. "I'll log the chat on my phone. He won't see it approaching." I watched Ethan constantly, always on alert, as the days passed. Often inquiring whether everything was okay, he seemed to detect my concern. Though inwardly I was a ball of nerves, I would smile and reassure him all was well. I started to wonder what Brian may do if he felt the strain in our house. At last the day of the meeting arrived. Just before Jenna headed to see Brian, she texted me. "I am en route. Want me luck." "Be safe," I said, walking the living room while heart pounding. I couldn't pay attention to anything else. Time opened out, every minute seeming to last eternity. I kept playing the alternatives in my head. What would happen should Brian become enraged? And what if he became violent? 1 hour later, Jenna sent me an SMS. "I got him on target to speak. I will drop over right now." As I watched for her to show up, my heart hammered in my chest. Jenna looked startled, but resolved as she at last passed through the door. She answered, "I got it," pulling out her phone. He said it. Though it was soon replaced with a feeling of dread, relief rushed over me. What would he say? My voice shook as I asked. Jenna turned on the tape, and I started to feel queasy as Brian's voice flooded the room. "Jenna, you were too frail. I had to model discipline for you. And Ethan still has to develop respect. Sometimes the only means is brutal love. Hearing those words turned my blood cold. It still amazes me that I let this man into our life. We have to go to the police with this, I remarked, my voice solid with fresh will. I agree, but more proof is needed. One recording might not be sufficient, Jenna said, her eyes sharp with resolve. Realizing she was right, I nodded. I'll monitor Ethan's room closely and keep the camera in there. We must record anything else that might occur as well. I couldn't get rid of the anxiety that night when I put Ethan asleep. Do you feel safe, buddy? Said, brushing his hair back. I asked. He raised his wide brown eyes full of innocence toward me. Of course, Mom. Why not I? I agree, but more proof is needed. One recording might not be sufficient, Jenna said, her eyes sharp with resolve. Realizing she was right, I nodded. I'll monitor Ethan's room closely and keep the camera in there. We must record anything else that might occur as well. I couldn't get rid of the anxiety that night when I put Ethan asleep. Do you feel safe, buddy? Said, brushing his hair back. I asked. He raised his wide brown eyes, full of innocence, toward me. Of course, Mom. Why not I? Though inside I was a tempest of anxiety, I faked a smile. My heart weighty with the knowledge of what was happening under our house, I kissed his forehead and left the room. I kept the camera running for the next few days every day viewing the film. With every viewing, my stomach turned to search for some sense of normal. Rather, though, I encountered more of Brian's volcanic rage. Often already in a bad attitude, Dad would arrive home late, and I would hear him ranting at Ethan for small faults like not cleaning his toys or leaving the bathroom light on. I found myself horrified. How could he abuse my darling son this way? As I listened back over the recordings, I whispered to myself. After another incident of Brian's wrath one evening, I made the decision to approach him. With heart beating, I said, "We need to talk, forcefully." From his page, Brian looked up and, startled, crossed his face. Regarding what? About your handling of Ethan. He's only a young man. I cried out, attempting to keep my voice steady. His countenance grew stiff. Leah, you're exaggerating. Children require discipline. They must grasp implications. No, there is not discipline here. Abuse it is, I shot back, my chest getting hot. Rising to his feet, he dwarfed me. You have no idea what you are talking about. I'm acting for him best. The fight got more intense, and I could sense the air between us snapping. For Ethan, I had to keep strong. I will stop you from hurting him going forward. If I have to, I'll go to the cops. Brian's eyes darkened, and I sensed something perilous flickering there. You truly believe that would work out for you? His voice low and intimidating, he cautioned. I backed off, startled. Though doubt crept into my head, I said, I'll protect my son. I considered what I had said that evening as I laid in bed. No matter the cost, I was resolved to shield Ethan. The camera stayed running, and I would do all it took to keep my son safe. Our house was clearly tense, and I knew I was headed for collision with the man I had once loved. I felt as the evening went on that the storm was only getting started. The days after my argument with Brian were marked by a great tension that seemed to smother our house. Keeping the camera running, I hoped to find anything that would validate his violent actions. Every time I watched the video, terror tore at my gut. The man I used to know had turned into a stranger, someone I worried would actually hurt my kid. Ethan stayed wonderfully oblivious to the storm building around us. Still his lovely, inquisitive self, he started sketching superheroes and asked questions about the universe. Though I respected his fortitude, I could see flashes of discomfort in Brian's eyes when he was around. It hurt my heart. I heard the front door crash one evening while cooking dinner. My heart flew. Brian arrived home early. Looking fast at the video feed on my phone, I saw him hurrying into the living room. I sensed something was about to happen. The tension was tangible. Playing on the floor with his toys, Ethan looked up at Brian and momentarily lit his face. holding up a crumpled paper rocket. "Dad, look at what I made," he remarked. Brian's expression contorted in irritation rather than encouragement. "What is that clutter? You know how to clean oneself, right?" He snipped, his voice cutting. I had a flash of wrath. How could he approach Ethan in such manner? Though I wanted to hurry in, I realized I had to compile more data, so I froze in the kitchen and watched the situation develop on the camera. Ethan dropped the rocket, and his smile darkened. "I am sorry, Dad." "Just trying to have fun," he said softly. Brian turned dark in his gaze. "Fun? You find this to be interesting? You really ought to develop some respect," he yelled, hot from anger on his face. I lost it in that instant. Adrenaline pounding through me, I rushed into the living room. "Brian, stop. He is only a young lad," I yelled, my voice cutting above his. He looked to me, surprise flickering across his face, then transforming into wrath. "Stay away from this, Leah. You know nothing about what you are talking about." "Still enough. You should treat him loving, not angry," I begged, positioned between Brian and Ethan. "Love. This child has to be disciplined. He is becoming weak from you." He spat back, hands locked at his sides. I stayed put, not backing down. "No, Brian. It is you that is weak. Hitting a child is abuse, not discipline." The room was tense at that point, and I felt clarity come over me. I couldn't allow him carry on this way. "I'm going to the cops with this," I said, my voice firm even though terror was racing through me. Brian laughed, a frigid, sour sound that made my spine shingle. "You truly believe that will work out for you? Leah, you will come to regret this." Realizing the risk I was putting Ethan and me in, my heart started racing. I'm shielding Brian, my son. That is all that counts. He moved in closer, his gaze narrows. "You shall come to regret this choice. You believe yourself to be the victim here. You have no idea what you are asking for." Ethan sensed the mounting tension just then and pulled at my shirt. His small voice quivering, he said, "Mom, I'm scared." I dropped down to hug him. "It's good, honey. You're safe," I comforted him, but within I was afraid. Knowing I had to act fast, I could feel the walls closing in. My mind racing, I stayed awake in bed as the evening wore on. The threats Brian sent rang in my head. Fear shouldn't control what I do. Ethan needed to be kept under all means protection. I decided early the following morning. I would compile the evidence and recordings I had gathered during the last several weeks and see the police. Brian's abuse cannot continue undetected anymore. Ethan woke up and I gave him a firm hug, resolved to protect him from the gloom hovering over us. "I adore you, buddy." "Remember that whatever happens," I whispered, kissing the top of his head. I had conflicting emotions as I got ready to face the cops. Though it was the moment I had been waiting for, it also was the one I most dreaded. Would they trust me? Would they watch out for Ethan? My heart hammering, I compiled the tapes, my will stiffening. Ready to defend my son, ready to face the monster I had previously called my spouse. Though the road forward would be difficult, I knew I had to be courageous for Ethan's benefit. I had to find the truth at all the expenses. That day I went to see the police felt like entering a cyclone. Holding the recordings tightly in my hands, each one a terrible reminder of what Brian had done to Ethan, my heart hammered in my chest. I inhaled deeply, reminding myself that I was acting to shield my son. I can let him down. He needed me to be courageous. Denver Street seemed strange, almost dreamlike as I drove to the police station. My head whirling with uncertainty and anxiety, I could hardly focus on the road. Should they reject me, what then? Should Brian learn, what would happen? I forced such ideas aside, though. I had to pay Ethan top attention. I was doing this for him. Arriving, I parked the car and sat for a time marveling at the structure. Reality of my circumstances set in. I was about to call in my husband for mistreatment of children. I thought I was entering a different universe, one full of uncertainty but also of optimism. Breathing deeply, I went into the police station, heart pounding. With palms shaking, I went up to the front desk, hoping to exude confidence. "I have to report child abuse," I continued, my voice consistent in spite of inner conflict. The policeman raised his head, clearly worried. "Naturally, ma'am. Let me show you to an interview space." He guided me down a corridor, and as I moved, I felt my choice weighed down on me. Though it felt enormous, this was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I sat beside a detective called Officer Ramirez in the interview room. She was polite, which calmed me a little. "Can you kindly inform me what has been occurring?" Her voice soft yet strong, she asked. I started telling everything. The marks on Ethan's arms, Brian's angry recordings, and Jenna's disclosures about her own past with him. I sensed the anxiety start to fade as I spoke, then empowerment took front stage. "I have recordings," I responded, my voice gathering power. I caught him slamming my son out of frustration. Officer Ramirez nodded with a sobering look. "We have to view those tapes, Leah. They might prove to be absolutely vital." I turned over my phone, hands shaking as she watched the video. I felt relief when I saw the reactions on her face: disbelief, rage, and finally determination. Her voice firm. "This is very serious," she added. "We will treat this extremely seriously." My heart thrashing, I left the police station after what seemed like hours. I had taken care of it. I had moved first toward safeguarding Ethan. Right now, all I could do was wait and hope for the best. The next several days were a rainbow of feelings. Ethan was interviewed and information was gathered by police starting an inquiry. Brian had no idea what was happening, hence I felt strange, calm, knowing he was still in the dark. Then arrived the day I had both expected and dreaded. Brian was brought in to ask questions. From a distance, I watched while my tummy turned over. "We seek to change the circumstances. We spin his way out of this." I held my breath when the cops called me at last to go over their results. Officer Ramirez said, her tone firm, but comforting, "We have enough proof to charge him with child abuse. We will be charging soon." I felt a tsunami of relief. At last, I could breathe. Brian would have to pay for his deeds. The truth was out. I stayed firm as the court processes developed. Jenna added weight to the case against Brian by testifying about her experiences. Speaking fervently about the recordings, I described my anxiety for Ethan. At last the day of the decision arrived. Heart-pounding, I sat in the courtroom as the judge declared, "We find the defendant, Brian, guilty of child abuse." Tears ran across my eyes. After so much effort for my son, at last justice had been done. As Brian was being taken away, I experienced a range of feelings: relief, grief, and a fresh strength, along with his prison sentence. Ethan and I started to reconstruct our life when Brian left. We moved into a nice new flat free from historical shadows. Ethan laughed and rejoiced gradually. I observed as he discovered solace in his artwork and gained new friends producing vibrant pictures bursting with superheroes and adventure. Jenna also grew to be somewhat important in our life, visiting frequently. We bonded together to enable each of us to recover from the trauma we had gone through. As I considered our path, I came to see how strong love is. My love for Ethan had motivated me to face the gloom, find the truth, and advocate justice. We came out stronger together, prepared to hand off the future. Knowing we were free and that I would always guard Ethan, I grinned as I watched him play one sunny afternoon. At last we were free. The path ahead seemed